the Bird Emergency. I'm Grant Williams. We're talking about helping, saving, protecting birds. And for this episode, I'm really chuffed because I'm speaking to someone who I've been Twitter stalking for a long time. And if you're someone like me who loves Twitter, and I check out the bird Twitter for a long time, and predating the genesis of this show, I was always watching Mark Holdsworth. Mark, consulting ornithologist, and you're just a long time birdo in the Australian scene. That's fair, isn't it, Mark?
I've been around a fair bit. That would have to be true. Yeah, so I've been birding either professionally or from an amateur point, and these cross over all the time for most of my life. So well over 40 years now. But yeah, I've been around, and Twitter has provided another form of communication, which is really useful to get the messages out there to a broader audience.
Just on Twitter, like if you watch the general media, Twitter is portrayed as this place of all these crazies and half-truths and myth-truths and conspiracy theories and whatnot. But bird Twitter's not like that, is it?
No, it's actually a forum to correct the record and to do it very quickly. So I've found it a really useful tool to get simple messages out there, breaking news. You know, when a new species has been turned up in a certain area, or in the case of the orange-bellied parrots, which is one of my key species I've been interested in working on for many years, we can get quick messages out about new birds turning up at Melaleuca, or a new banded bird that's been sighted in the wintering grounds. So it's a really useful communication tool, and many people follow it. So it's really positive, and to correct the records too. So sometimes there are things that have been put out there that are myths about many species, and so ornithologists like myself can actually quickly correct those myths and mistruths.
Now, you mentioned one of the iconic threatened, endangered Australian birds, the orange-bellied parrot there, the OBP. Now, you've been working on the OBP for a long time. But that's not the focus of what I want to talk to you about. So we're going to put the OBP aside for another episode, because I don't reckon that a short chat will give the OBP any form of justice. So I'm going to start, Mark.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to start, Mark, with talking about 2014. You were nominated for the Tasmanian of the Year in the Australia Day awards list. Now, what was that experience like? And specifically, what were you nominated for?
Yeah, it was quite humbling. So I was one of 4 finalists for Tasmania, and the award, or the nomination, was for my work in conservation, but also to encourage other people, young people, to become involved in ornithology, in ecology. This is when I was with the Department of Primary Industries, Parks, Water and Environment. And so I'd spent the best part of 35 years fostering and encouraging younger people to be involved. So that was primarily one of the reasons why I was nominated, but also my efforts for conservation of threatened species, in particular the orange-bellied parrot. So it was really humbling. It was a great experience. We had a ceremony and I got a certificate. Unfortunately, I didn't make it to the big gig, the big dance up in Canberra, as it were. But I knew that I wouldn't, if I got to Canberra, I wouldn't have won, because Adam Goods was the Australian of the Year at that time, and I'm pretty sure I would have been bowled over by Adam. That's for sure.
I was just going to ask who was the Australian of the Year in 2014, and now I remembered Adam Goods, but I didn't place the year. Who was the Tasmanian of the Year in 2014?
Oh, I was hoping you were going to ask me that. Yeah,
I'm going to put that in the end in
you
the
put
end
me on the
notes,
spot
Mark.
there.
Yeah, it probably wasn't a fair
let's
question, but it was in your bio material, so I sort of thought, it's fair enough to ask. Oh, look,
let's put it this let's put it this way. He didn't beat Adam Goods.
yeah, well, obviously not a household name. Well, not in your household or my household, anyway. Uh, Mark,
That's for sure.
in the bio information that you sent, it tells me that in 2006 you completed a master's. Now, what was your master's in, and did you keep going in academia, or did you straight away get out into practical conservation?
Yeah, well, this is a longer story. The backstory of this is more important, I suppose. So I started off as a trainee ranger with the Parks and Wildlife Service way back in 1979, at the ripe old age of 17. So this is in the days when governments gave traineeships, which were permanent public servants, and we spent 4 years learning to be a ranger in the parks all around Tasmania. So I cut my teeth in park management in all of the major parks around Tasmania. And included in that, we spent a lot of time in head office and worked with some of the specialist sections in then was called Magnet Court down in Sandy Bay. So I spent, and I was already into birds in those days. So I spent several months working with the wildlife management section, and that was the first time I actually went down to Melaleuca and worked with the orange-bellied parrot. This was back in 1981, it would have been. And so that's when I first became acquainted with the orange-bellied parrot, which was a dream job. So I spent the early years of my career working on that bird with some of the specialists, but then moved on to go on to be a ranger, but then sort of evolved over time and got back into wildlife management as a permanent officer and crept my way up through the system. And eventually, with the help of Peter Brown, my good friend and key person who was running the Orange Belly Parrot program at the time in the mid-80s, I assisted him, and as he moved on, I took over from him within the agency. So I effectively ran the Orange Belly Parrot program from the 90s onwards, both captive breeding and the wild research. So it was quite a big responsibility. And so part of that, going back to the question, was my research was based on the work that I was doing within the department. So I was doing it actually part-time. And I probably took much longer than my supervisors would have preferred. So it probably took 9 years to pull together. But with a threatened species, you probably can't do it any quicker anyway, because you can't get a lot of data in a short period of time. So by necessity, it took that amount of time. So the title of my thesis was the reproductive success and survival of the orange-bellied parrot. And you can Google that. You can download it for free from UTAS. I think I captured what was important about the orange-bellied parrot at the time, and I'm quite proud of what I did during those years.
Now, I hadn't told you this earlier, but that I think was the very first resource that I downloaded when it sort of became possible to do that easily on the ABP.
Yep.
So, but I hadn't actually put the sort of the name to the publication, because it's many years since I looked at it. Mark, did you go on with any further education, or did you then just and I shouldn't say just, because there's two real pathways for people to be involved in conservation, and you don't need to go back into the lab and be crunching numbers on the computer. So tell me which path you took.
Yeah, well, as a permanent public servant, I had no need to pursue the academia. I mean, there was an opportunity there to go and do a PhD or to be more scientifically inclined. But because I'd already spent the best part of 35 years in the career and actually doing things, so I'm a bit of a doer rather than a writer. So I was comfortable to be able to keep going with what I was doing and use my experience in all sorts of fields. So, it wasn't just the orange-bellied parrot, but I was involved with and still am in the swift parrot recovery team. I manage the captive breeding of Tasmanian devils, so I help establish the captive breeding population as part of the insurance population during my later career within the department. And having responsibility for a large team. So my section at its peak was 25 people I was managing there. So it's a huge responsibility, and I took great enjoyment, and I involved a lot of other people in the program. So I didn't have any real desire to go on and do any further research, although I still am interested in science and still conducting scientific programs. That never stops. That's always part of our work as conservation managers. Science is always part of it. You can never get away from that. In fact, it's vital. You have to collect information and publish and communicate those results as widely as you possibly can. And probably the closest that I've got at the moment is I'm running a long-term study on the Christmas Island goshawk. So I've been running that since 2006. It started in 2004, and so we go up there and each year banding the bird. So it's a long-term colour banding study. So I've never walked away from actually doing research, but I didn't have any desire to go into academia at all.
Well, if we're still friends at the end of this, Mark, that'd be a project that I'd really like to doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really speaking to you as part of a islands sort of series, and I'm talking to Rob Davis soon about the Pacific birds and the issues that are faced on small island nations and small island states that don't have the kind of resources that we have here. Mark, it just came to mind. I had mentioned that you'd done the masters in 2006, but I didn't ask you what field you were studying. Is that were you doing biology, or were you doing ecology, or were you doing something like me, a pretend scientist, applied science course?
No, it was basically all the information that we'd gathered on the orange-bellied parrot for the best part of a decade. So I was pulling all that information together on the reproductive success and the survival of the species. So it was really information that we'd been gathering. And when I say we, a lot of this was involved volunteers. So a lot of volunteers going down to Melaleuca, and I was crunching the numbers. And of course, I could write some chapters in my thesis about that. So I actually owe a lot for the gathering of that information to the hundreds of volunteer or thousands of volunteer hours that were put into that. And that continues today, not just with the orange-bellied parrot program, but many other programs, as you know, so reliant on volunteers and citizen science to gather fundamental information about the species of interest that we're working on. Without that, we'd virtually have nothing. Governments don't fund primary research anymore, and so volunteers are becoming more and more important for gathering fundamental information.
There's a news story every night on the news, Mark, about the latest medical discovery that sinks like a stone that we never hear of again. But there's no desire anywhere to fund people who want to go to really difficult places and do really difficult work. Frustrating.
Yeah, it's really it saddens me because as I said earlier, that I was very lucky to be employed permanently at the age of 17 and just evolved through a government system, and there were quite a few of us in that system, and we gained knowledge and built on our knowledge, and unfortunately governments don't do that anymore. So people have to compete for jobs, and often they're short-term contracts, and so you lose that continuity and that expertise over time very quickly. And I think it's a sad indictment on governments, both Commonwealth and state, in recent times. Probably, and when I say recent times, probably the last 10 or 15 years, we're now, it's a dog-eat-dog world out there in conservation science and getting young people into there, unless you rely on volunteers. And I think that volunteering is great and we need it, but I think we should be employing these people. They do such a valuable job. Certainly young people, they need to be paid adequately for their efforts.
Couldn't agree with you more there, Mark. Now let's talk present day. You've become well known for your work eradicating pests on offshore islands. So can we start with let's start with how you got into that.
Yeah, that's a complex question, but and I wouldn't say that I'm one of the prime movers in eradication, but I'm certainly a key player and a building industry, I'll call it, of eradicating introduced pests off islands. So my primary involvement has been through my partner, Sue Robinson. So Sue is well known for her work on Macquarie Island. So she spent some time on Macquarie Island, quite a lot of time, assisting with the cat eradication program, and then evolved into the eradication of the rodents down there, so both the rats and the mice. So that was a huge program, multi-million-dollar program supported by the state and Commonwealth governments. And so that is now cat, rat and mouse free through that huge effort. But part of that program involved conservation detection dogs to hunt and to detect rodents and rabbits and earlier cats. And so Sue became heavily involved in dogs. And so through osmosis, Sue and I have developed an interest, and in my retirement, we're now running conservation dogs for assisting various projects. And a lot of these projects tend to be eradication programs on offshore islands. And probably our first major project was on Dirk Hartog Island off Western Australia, where we were assisting with verification after the primary knockdown for getting rid of cats. So the first step with eradication is usually using some lethal means of removing the problem animal. And in the case of Dirk Hartog Island, that was using poisonous baits and also trapping. And then dogs are used to not to hunt cats, but to verify whether the animals have been removed. So we spent several years going there and searching the island in a sort of systematic way to get an understanding whether or not the cats have been removed.
When was the last visit to Dirk Hartog that you did?
Oh, that would be 2 or 3 years ago now, but it has been declared cat-free. A couple of years ago, it was declared cat-free. I think it's 1 year after the last live cat has been sighted, it's been declared, and so that's a success. So that's the largest island in the world that cats have been removed from. So it's sort of 75 kilometres long and about 5 or 6 kilometres wide, about 600 square kilometres, huge area. And now they're actually introducing native animals onto the island. So some of the hare wallabies have been put on there, and I think dibblers may be put out there sooner or later. So, and this is the whole purpose of island eradications. So we know that we've got all these terrible introduced species in Australia: foxes, cats, rats, mice. But on the big islands, Tasmania and the mainland, it's almost impossible. Well, it is impossible to eradicate. So we're left with fencing off areas to protect some of our native species. But that comes with its own problems, because some of the species that are living in those landscapes need to move. And if you put a fence or a barrier in the way, then that creates other problems. Whereas islands are sort of a natural landform. And so we know if we can remove those species, those introduced species up there, then we've got a high chance that they won't reinvade, providing the biosecurity is right. And so we've got a much greater confidence that the introduced species, the reintroduced species, the native species, will survive without intervention for a very long time. Whereas putting up fences in mainland areas comes with its own costs and problems. Fences don't last forever. You might be lucky to get 10 years out of a fence, and you've got to spend more money. But the best fence is a sea barrier around an island, and so that's why there's a lot of interest in eradicating from offshore islands. And of course, the New Zealanders have pioneered this work, so they've done a lot of eradications in New Zealand, and this is now sort of sweeping the world. There's lots of programs around the world that are now doing this. So we've spent some time with the Mexicans. They're doing some great work on some offshore islands, Guadalupe Island and Socorro. So they're removing cats off those islands, and again, all in support of threatened species or the ability to reintroduce species that have been wiped out in the past.
Now, you mentioned Guadalupe Island. Now, that's really, you posted on Twitter recently some albatrosses, and
yeah,
that's what really caused me to reach out to you for this chat. Tell us about Guadalupe, and tell us about the conservation framework that operates in Mexico as against the one that people would be familiar with how it operates here in Australia.
Yeah, it's quite different, but I found it quite inspiring how the Mexicans or the people that we were working with are pulling together resources and getting on with the job. So it's primarily non-government operated, and with a lot of investment from donors and corporate bodies to put in money into their operations. And but they're very well organised, highly trained people, and very good scientific minds behind it. And importantly, they are reaching out to people around the world for help as well. So they're not afraid to ask for help. And that's how we got involved to review the work on the use of their conservation dogs to detect cats on the island. So it's a very impressive but very different operation. So not a lot of government involvement. They need government support to get permits, and there's lots of complications. For example, this island has got a Navy base on it, and so you have to work with the Mexican Navy to be able to access some of the areas. So so it's quite complex in some respects, but quite different from the Australian system. So there was a bit of an eye opener for us, but nevertheless they're doing a good thing, and the dogs are working really well, and we're confident that they'll remove cats off Socorro within the next year or two. Guadalupe has a little way to go. Primarily, again, it requires some primary knockdown, and in that case, it's trapping. For better or for worse, the Mexicans won't allow poisoning on these islands, so they have to rely on hunting techniques, so shooting and trapping. So it's a lot of hard work, hard yakka for trappers and shooters to get out there and remove the cats. And I should add, when I talk about killing animals, none of us who are involved in eradication programs take any pleasure from killing animals. It's something that none of us we'd rather not do, but it is a necessary evil for the benefit of other native species, and so the Mexicans are likewise. Their goal is to re-establish some native wildlife in a small patch, and we don't take pleasure out of having to kill animals, and certainly we do it in the most humane way possible.
I recently spoke with Scott Mowat in New Zealand, and he was telling me about their fenced-off reserves and that and their offshore island programs, and that when they had eradicated from some areas weasels, ferrets, and stoats, that sort of sounds like good news, but that then cats came back and rabbits came back because their predators were gone, and that there were sort of unintended consequences of the predator removal. Is that something that that you've seen on? Well, let's start with Mexico, with Guadalupe. Is that going to be an issue for them? Have they got particular problems with with rodents coming back there?
They do have house mouse on there, but generally with rats and mice, they don't respond to predators as much as they do respond to changing food supply. So we all know about mouse plagues on mainland Australia, and you could throw in 1,000 times as many foxes and cats, and they would never get rid of the mice when there's a plague on. And of course, the biggest driver is the food supply. So when you get a flush of growth, New Zealand's quite different because they've got a whole suite of predators and introduced herbivores. So I've got great sympathy for the New Zealanders because they've got a very complex predator-prey relationship in some of those areas. Mostly these islands have very simple systems. You might have one predator that's introduced and maybe, say, a cat or black rat and in some occasions mice. And usually they're pretty easily to deal with. If you've got several predators and many different herbivores, then that gets really complicated. Ideally, you remove all of them. And in the case of Macquarie Island, that's exactly what's happened. So we've got rid of cats, we've got rid of rabbits, and then both the rodents. So it's now introduced predator and herbivore free. So that's the ideal.
You mentioned that there's many island projects that you've been working in alongside Sue, and she's the dog expert, and you're the bird expert. Is that how
Yep.
that how harmonious?
That's how it works.
That's how that harmonious partnership works. Now you worked on
Yep.
Lord Howe Island. Now Lord Howe is a protectorate or an island for New South Wales. That's right, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
So how was that? What was the genesis of your involvement in that project? That's not one that I've looked at, but I know that Lord Howe Island has uh, a number of unique subspecies or races of many different classes of animals. So how did the Lord Howe Island project come about, and how successful has it been?
Yeah. Well, the Lord Howe Island has long had a problem with introduced black rats and mice, but particularly the black rats. It was long known, this is going back decades and decades, that they had a problem with the Kentia palm industry. So Kentia palms are harvested on the island, the palm seeds, and they grow the plants for the nursery trade. But one of the big problems was the rats were eating the palm seeds. So the locals knew about the problems of rats, and in fact, I think there was bounties on rats going way, way back. So the locals were very familiar with the problem of black rats. But then, of course, we do know that rodents are devastating for nesting seabirds, and so Lord Howe Island has got a great array of nesting seabirds, burrowing petrels, so fleshy-footed shearwaters, little shearwaters. We've got Providence petrels and various other burrowing petrels that nest on the island, and we know that rats will utilise these resources when they can, so eating eggs and also small chicks and even adults. So it's clear that they are devastating on seabirds. So the other feature of Lord Howe Island is it's a World Heritage Area, and having an introduced predator effectively on the island like black rats is sort of against the ideals of a World Heritage Area. And so over many years, and I do mean many years, it's probably the best part of 20 years it probably started, various people in various positions have agitated to consider removal of rodents from the island. But it wasn't until recent times when the technology became available, similar to Macquarie Island, to be able to do this in a much more sophisticated and accurate way. And that's the use of aerial baiting, so using toxic baits to distribute across landscapes in a even way. So using GPS technology and helicopters to distribute toxic baits in a very systematic way is the key to these island eradications now. So you can do it without putting out too much bait, but ensuring that there is enough out there to knock down the population. And so after much trials and tribulations, and I won't go into that, but certainly Lord Howe Island had some significant hurdles, both from a local community point of view and political point of view and funding point of view. It took them many years to get to the point of actually implementing an eradication program. And that finally happened earlier last year, so about April last year. And so the first thing is to knock the population down, and then to follow up with other techniques to determine if the target animal, in this case the rodents, have been successfully removed, or at least it looks like it's zero. On Lord Howe Island, however, there's an urban area, so people live on there. So there's hundreds of houses and motels on there, and we couldn't, well, the Lord Howe Island Board couldn't drop poison baits across private properties. That wasn't going to be very welcomed by the locals or the visitors. So instead, they established 20,000 bait stations on a 10-metre grid. So there's an amazing effort by the Lord Howe Island Board employees to go around and check on the bait stations and top up the bait virtually on a daily basis. over a period of time. But even so, that was going to be the weak point in the program. So it's important to throw every tool you've got into these weak points. And so one of those tools is use of dogs, detection dogs. And so the program had actually budgeted for the purchase of some dogs to throw into the program. But unfortunately, the dogs that were also required to do biosecurity checks on the cargo coming in and out on the airplanes and on the boat, the supply boat, which included going to Port Macquarie. And the dogs were actually pretty buggered. They were working virtually full time. And so I was quickly realised towards the end of the monitoring program that they needed some more assistance from some dogs. So there was a bit of a call out around the conservation dog network, both here and in New Zealand, to see if someone was able to come and help out to fill in. We actually had one of the dogs had become temporarily lame, so they needed some help. So Sue and I managed to clear the decks, and we got one of our dogs over there, and eventually we took two of our dogs over there to lend a hand. So we spent a couple of months on the island to finish up the monitoring program at the end of the eradication.
I want to ask you something specifically about the dogs in a minute, and it might not be something that you know the answer to, Mark. But for those of us who have never been involved in carrying out a survey, a 10-meter grid system, how does that work? How often is a bait station placed when you're working on a 10-meter grid? Logic tells me that you're working in a 10-meter squares, and at the point of each point of a square there's a bait station. Is that how it works, or am I?
That's exactly how it works. So if you look 10 metres, you'll see a flagging tape, and then underneath that flagging tape there will be a plastic box, and that's got the bait in it. And again, the technology is really key here, because the team over there, the rat eradication program team, had iPads and tablets, and they can navigate to each of these. And it served a really good purpose from the detection dog work too, because we could navigate through properties. We knew exactly where we were all the time. So this use of technology is really important for eradication programs. We can do it very systematically. We know each of the bait stations that they've gone to. You can get onto the iPad, you can log in, you can record how many baits were taken or chewed, how many more baits you've been put in there. So the data gathering is virtually live. So it's really fantastic technology and really useful for our work as well. And on top of that, our dogs were always GPS tracked. So we've got tracks of the dogs and their effort over those couple of months. So a huge amount of information. So we know exactly where we've been, and more importantly, where we haven't been. So the managers can actually see, okay, we've missed a spot over here, or we've missed some bait stations, so we can get some teams out to fix that little loophole, as it were, so that we can get even coverage right across the area of interest.
The use of pesticides is always controversial and maybe a bit vexed, certainly in some historical examples. What kind of pesticide is being used in modern day eradication programs such as Lord Howe? Is there any effect on predator species who might be eating poisoned target species, like the rats or the mice?
Yeah, most definitely. And so the rodenticide that was used on Lord Howe Island and is commonly used on many offshore islands is the active ingredient is brodifacoum, commonly known as Talon. It's a single dose rodenticide, so it kills the animal quickly. But unfortunately, it's very toxic for secondary poisoning. So there is a risk for predators that might see a sick rat flopping around on the surface, and so there is a risk to killing other species. Now, in the case of Lord Howe Island, those species were the endemic subspecies of the currawong. Might be a species now, I'm not sure. And the Lord Howe Island woodhen, of course, so they could quite easily take up baits or dead or dying rats and mice. So Taronga Zoo was engaged to set up a major project to establish holding pens for virtually the entire population of both those species. So those birds were held in captivity for, it would be at least 6 months, perhaps longer, to avoid them being poisoned by these baits. And as far as we know, there were no animals that were poisoned secondarily because they were all safe in captivity. And all the woodhens and all the currawongs are back out there. So it was overall, it's been a real success. So the last, and just a couple of days ago, we heard from Lord Howe that there hasn't been a live or freshly dead rat or mouse seen on the island for over 250 days. So it's 250 days since the last live rat or mouse was seen. You can't declare it rat-free or rodent-free for at least 2 years. So we've got to go so mid next year will be the real test where we'll go back and we'll put out lots of monitoring equipment, cameras, tracking pads, and also dogs, and go all over the island to determine whether the rats and mice have actually been eradicating. But the signs are looking good. So the program was quite impressive, the amount of effort and the amount of expertise. We had keepers there looking after the captive birds. We've got the team on the island escorting us around all the properties. The amazing helicopter pilots and the guys putting the baits out there. The locals were really impressive because without the local knowledge and the most often young people who are involved in the program, and when I say there would have been 20 or 30 people when we were there alone that were employed to run this program. So it was very impressive, and I think that it's all pointing in the right direction that hopefully by middle of next year, Lord Howe Island will be declared rodent-free.
Now, Mark, for people listening to our chat, they need to understand the magnitude of the resources put into that project. I mean, for people sitting in Australia and on the mainland of Australia, or even on Tasmania, or anyone anywhere else in the world, Lord Howe is just a speck in the Pacific Island, in the Pacific Ocean. How many k's off the coast from Sydney is it?
Yeah, it's about closest point is a bit over 500 kilometres. So it's about 600 k's from Sydney. So quite a way out there. But it's if you haven't been there, go there. It's an amazing place, and it'll be even more amazing once if we have it rodent free. And there's already signs that some of the seabirds are recovering. So for the first time, some of the petrels are producing young where they never have before, and even the masked booby hadn't been nesting on the mainland of Lord Howe Island for many years, and there was a couple of nests just this summer just gone. Now, whether that was because the rodents have been removed or just coincidental, I'm not sure. But I'd like to think that That's the reason why. And it'll be just a bird or seabird paradise without those predators on the island. So there's no other predators on there. There's no cats on the island. And so it'll be predator free, and it'll be a real oasis for seabird breeding success.
Well, we'll give a preemptory hooray to the RAP.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah.
and the staff from Taronga Zoo, who were on the island with the captive maintenance program. That's phenomenal. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do this this podcast is to let people know about the huge effort and the amazing financial resources that have been put into that project. But the important thing is the success. So that's an absolute ripper, Mark. Now, before I move on, I heard the dog in the background, and I'm not sure if listeners could hear it too. My question that I didn't know was going to be fair to ask you is, and it's about resources. What does it cost? Like you mentioned that the RAP, the project on Lord Howe Island, were going to buy some dogs, but the dogs had to be shared because of obviously cost, I would imagine, with other duties on the mainland. What does it cost to bring one dog up to speed to be working as an eradication or a detection dog for rodents?
That's how long is a piece of string. I think it depends on the purpose and the time frame, but you're looking in the order of $20,000 to $30,000 to get a dog that's up to a high level of competency. So you can't just get any dog. You have to have a training, and you need to get the dog early enough to, in fact, getting pups are the way to go. And you train them to a certain level, but some of them don't make the grade. So there's a lot of redundancy there. So there are many people who are training dogs for all sorts of purposes, not just conservation dogs, police dogs, drug detection dogs. It's all the same technique. And so you can go through a lot of dogs that don't make the grade that you require. So if you build all that cost in training and then having to start again, then it is a very expensive business. But generally the rule of thumb is somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 to get a dog to a high level, to get it into the field and be confident that it's working well. And of course it doesn't stop there, because you have to keep training the dogs. So we've got 10 dogs here, for example, and of course you can't discard them once they're here. So we've got a retired rabbit dog from Macquarie Island here, Rico. He's out there relaxing and asleep, hopefully, and we have to look after them for the rest of their life. Occasionally we give them to friends or relatives to look after, but there's a ongoing cost for the rest of their life. So it's not a cheap business to be in. And in fact, I think if we were into this in a commercial sense, we would be broke now. We're doing it because there's a positive outcome. And so it's an important tool that we can contribute to conservation. And so in many respects, we're subsidising the conservation outcome through the use of dogs. And we're happy to do that because it gets us, the benefit is it gets us to some amazing places, Dirk Hartog Island and Lord Howe Island. So that's virtually priceless. So we're happy with that.
So what's your current eradication program, Mark?
Yeah, this one, well, it's been a series of programs that we've been involved in. The first one was Tasman Island, which is off the southeast of Tasmania. It's a small island, but very steep. People would be familiar with the Three Capes track, very spectacular coastal cliffs, and there's an island just off the corner of the Capes. And called Tasman Island, and that had a population of somewhere around 50 feral cats on there. And this is quite a few years ago now, but the Pennicott Foundation was kind enough to provide resources to help with eradication of the cats off that island. So the Pennicott Wilderness Journeys does tours around the Tasman Peninsula and around Bruny Island. And of course, they gain a huge business through tourism. But Rob Pennicott and his family decided long ago that they're getting enough out of their business that they would like to turn it back into conservation. And the first cab off the rank was clearly Tasman Island, because they were doing tours around that island. And an effort was put in. Sue, principally, and some colleagues on the mainland, Michael Johnson, used a new toxin called PAP and field trialling a technique for distributing this toxin as the primary knockdown. And we used dogs as the mop-up and also trapping. And that was declared cat-free quite a few years ago now. And importantly, the key species we're trying to protect there were fairy prions. And we estimated there were 50,000 prions killed per year on the island, which is just massive. And now it's being cat-free. We're going to have 50,000 prions per year more each year indefinitely. So the place is now booming without that predator there. Then we led on to Big Green Island, which is up in the northeast of Tasmania. And again, the Pennicott Foundation funded that, and that was to get rid of the black rats. And in that case, it was very much similar to the Lord Howe Island experience, was using trapping in stations, but a grid of about 20 metres with stations every 20 metres in these plastic boxes. And we used volunteers, again, using the technology. We used a thing called Fulcrum to navigate through this network of stations. Oh, sorry, and baiting stations. Sorry, we used bait as well initially, and then followed up by trapping and replacing the baits. And that was has been declared rodent-free or rat-free a couple of years ago. And so we've been working on the next project. Unfortunately, we were keen to start last year, but there were a few hiccups in the bureaucracy, so we didn't get the approval to start last year on George's Rocks off the northeast of the state. And our little pandemic got in the way, or it looked like it was going to scuttle our program this year, but thankfully we got the okay from the Parks and Wildlife Service to commence the eradication of black rats off George Rocks. This is a tiny island. This is only 4 hectares, and we started that last week using volunteers, and that's going to use traps initially, so snap traps, and then mop up with some targeted baiting so that we can minimise that potential for secondary poison. So that's progressing really well. So we're up to 149 rats on a 4-hectare island. We think we might be down to the last 10 or 20 animals, and with eradication programs, that's always the hardest ones to get. They're going to be the smart ones, and so that's when the targeted poisoning and possibly the use of dogs will come into their own.
What's on 4-hectare island? What's the bird species there that you're looking at protecting?
Yeah, the species that are still hanging in there in reasonable numbers are fairy penguins and short-tailed shearwaters, so they're pretty robust. So the adults certainly aren't predated on by black rats. But the ones that are almost certainly been wiped out is the white-faced storm petrel. So it used to be an island that had quite a few hundred pairs of white-faced storm petrels, a small burrowing seabird, and they haven't been seen on the island for many years now. And almost certainly the crested tern colonies, which also nest out there, have been impacted on. So we would expect when we remove the rats from the island, that the storm petrels will return. There's still storm petrels within the area, and we'd also expect things like common diving petrels to turn up, and the crested tern population to increase, so they'll be more successful. It's quite incredible how the rats are so hungry this time of year. So virtually anything you put down, even during the middle of the day, they'll go for. So it just shows that even on a small area, they can manage to hang in with even a small amount of resources. So when those seabirds turn up in the spring and summer, they must get hammered so badly. So it'll be interesting to see what the response is once we remove these rodents from the island. And of course, they've turned up on shipwrecks almost certainly. So they're quite a long way from the mainland of Tasmania, so unlikely to re-invade. And so we're really confident it'll be a positive outcome for the seabirds.
More good news, Mark, and that's what we're all about. What's next, Mark? What's the next project?
Well, we're looking at a few other islands up in the Furneaux group. There's a great, I'm not going to live long enough to finish them all, but we'll tick them off one by one. And as we build our experience and our network, then it becomes easier. On George Rocks, we will actually be swinging into eradication of an introduced plant species, which is called mirrorbush. It actually came from New Zealand, so it's a coprosma. So we'll, probably over the summer, we hope to remove that, and that'll improve some of the nesting habitat for some of the species. So it's an ongoing thing, but with the support of the Pennicott Foundation and other supporters, donors can actually donate through the Pennicott Foundation, so they'll match dollar for dollar to assist us with this work. And so we'll keep plugging away with whatever resources we can gain over time.
Twiggy, Gina, Jeff Bezos, if you're listening, just...
Yep. Bring it on.
Now, Mark,
if only.
Well, Mark, that concludes the really serious business for our chat. Now you know what comes next, don't you?
Yeah, I listened to Tegan Douglas's interview. So you're going to ask me my best field guide? Would that where we're going?
That was the question. What's your field guide of choice?
Okay. I'm going to be a bit vague around this, and there's a couple of categories. So the one that I have greatest feel for, but is probably not a particularly useful field guide, is the Michael Sharlin book. It was written back in the 50s. So this is a Tasmanian field guide. It's got black and white pictures, not very many, but it's got words in there. So that's when I first learnt about birding. So my heart is with Michael Sharlin's Birds of Tasmania field guide. But then later on, and the one that I really got hooked into birding in probably when I was 14, 15 was Peter Slater's double volume.
High five.
Hardbound.
High five, that's the one.
Not particularly.
Now, what was it?
It's pocket size, but cumbersome.
No, yeah, that's right. Too big for your pocket. Sacred Kingfisher on volume 1. Eastern Yellow Robin on volume 2.
That's right.
And what were they? 7 years apart?
That's the other ones. Yeah. So these, ironically, I took, these have been everywhere with me, including to Macquarie Island. So I'm not quite sure, the non-passerines was okay going to Macquarie Island, but why I took the passerines to Macquarie Island, I don't know. But that's been walked around all over Macquarie Island. And in my earlier career, that they were constant companions. So that's probably my go-to in a romantic sense, I would say. But I like all the ones, Pizzity, night, and Menkor's one. I've got to put in a plug for Pete Menkor's. He's a good friend of mine. They're all got their strengths and weaknesses, and I have to say that nowadays the old app is the go-to. So, but I've got a love for the real thing in the hand and something weighing down the backpack when you're out in the field.
Valet Peter Slater,
indeed,
great pioneer in the field, and I think I shared in an earlier episode that my volume 1 got worn out, but the actual story was camping under a beautiful manigum on the shores of, or on the banks of the Acheron River, sound asleep, about 3 inches of rain. My book got wet, got destroyed when my tent flooded. So I learned some lessons. Now you mentioned that it was a Tasmanian field guide that helped you get the awareness that you were pretty into birds. What you're reaching for it? You're reaching for it. I can hear it.
Yeah. There it is. It's not much. Just a little hard bound.
Yeah. I think again, at the risk of making it all about me again, we had here Angus and Robertson there, the imprint on your one. We had the Gould Lovers, the Gould League of Bird Lovers series, numbers 1 through to 7. I think 7 was where I stopped collecting them, but they were the things as a kid that really got me going. Were you? Did you get enticed into birds, or were you just always fascinated and really into them?
I think I was fascinated through my dad, because he came from the country up the Derwent River, and we used to go trout fishing. So as a little tacker, I'd spend time in the bush with Dad, and we'd see things as we're just walking around trying to catch fish, mostly not catching fish. And one of probably the thing that's burnt into my memory is what he called diamond birds. And I actually managed to see one, and the diamond bird, of course, is the spotted pardalate burrowing into a bank. So as probably a 5 or 6 year old, I can remember Dad pointing these out, and they were the most, even without binoculars now, they're just sitting on the bank. So I reckon that's when my first desire to look at more birds started, and it evolved from there. But then when the first atlas came out, or there was a call out for atlases in the 70s. I think I actually read it in a Women's Weekly magazine. There was a little article about birding and a call out for volunteers to check out birds and atlas. So that's when I've first got involved semi-professionally and more seriously, and that was the time when I had to get a decent field guide and some binoculars, more importantly.
Now, you mentioned a river, and our marvellous NBN got in the way. So, what was the name of the river?
The Derwent River. So the Derwent is the main river that goes through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of course.
But higher up, up around Hamilton and Ouse and in the upper Derwent Valley.
Lovely part of the world.
Indeed.
What's your favourite piece of equipment for when you're heading out on any kind of expedition?
Binoculars. I'm naked without binoculars. And I've actually accidentally left them. I think the last time I left them was at in a car park at a motel in Carlton before I caught the ferry back to Hobart. And I'd nearly got to the ferry, and something told me that the binoculars weren't in the car. And I stopped and I looked, and they weren't there. And I'd actually placed them down before getting in the car. Swarovskis, good ones. And I had to go back and make myself late for the ferry. And believe it or not, the binoculars were sitting in the car park there where I'd left them, and no one had noticed. So,
well,
and they're still with me.
I was just going to see if Mr. Swarovski was listening. He can just look you up and get a package in the mail. All right. That's a horrible feeling, isn't it? When you remember that you've left something somewhere, and it's heartbreaking. You go back and it's gone. So good on you. That was the good people of Tasmania, Mark. They're looking after you.
No, that was Carlton in Melbourne. I trust Melbourneites.
Oh, no. No one likes us at the moment, Mark. Have you noticed that? Super spreaders. I don't know how long that's going to last, but no one's allowed to come here. We're not allowed to go anywhere. But it just means we can.
You'll get through it. We
will. We'll soldier on. Mark.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you these in the wrong order because I'm really interested. You've been to so many amazing places, and you're still working on a project on Christmas Island. Where's your favourite place to go birding?
To go birding?
Yeah, not working, birding.
To go birding. Look, I also do some work in the Simpson Desert for University of Sydney, and I've been doing that for the last couple of years, doing some general bird surveys for Ayrshire Talek as part of a long-term study, looking at bird assemblages in arid lands and how they operate. And so the Simpson Desert, but more generally arid Australia. Coming from Tasmania, it's just such a amazing environment. We're used to seeing hills and not much of the sky, but getting out into arid lands. So the Strzelecki Desert, Simpson Desert, Eyre Basin, and the bird life in those areas are just astounding. And sometimes you go there and there's virtually nothing, but then other times you go there and everything is booming, and budgerigars by the hundreds of thousands. It's amazing the extremes in that country and how my idea of deserts was desolate, but it's far from the truth. Deserts are some of our most productive environments from a bird perspective, that's for sure, certainly following the rain. So I'm actually looking forward to getting back up there if Queensland opens its borders in the next month or two, and really looking forward to getting back out into some big sky country.
Yeah, the Channel Country is pretty amazing. Great place.
Yeah.
I probably don't need to. No, actually, no. It's probably not a question that needs to be asked, Mark. But you've seen Lake Eyre in flood. Yeah,
a couple of times. Yeah, I've seen only parts of it, and I've seen the sort of, the Strzelecki and the Coopers Creek in flood. So, and I've flown over the southern Eyre Basin, but I'd like to spend some more time in that area to really get to know it. But she's a big country out there, lots to see.
That's a dream trip for so many Australians, but for international listeners, I'll try and put some decent images if I can get permission of Lake Eyre in flood and put some maps up to give you an idea of how far from anything Lake Eyre is,
Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
put yeah, I'll link to some vision, some video of the rivers, or the creeks as we should rightly call them, coming into flood, and what an amazing natural spectacle that is.
Yeah.
It's not something that you
Yeah.
can time
Yeah.
a holiday for, because that
No.
part of the country doesn't get regular rain. We don't know when it's going to come. It could be years between the event, but if you're lucky enough to be able to do it, do it. It's amazing.
Yep. No. Yep. No, I agree.
Favorite bird, Mark?
Well, the orange-bellied parrot. It's been, part of my professional life, and it's the one I'll continue to battle for one way or another. So that has to be top of the list. But probably the one I have a strong feeling for, because it was the one I worked on most early on my career. I had the great fortune, but my colleague had the great unfortune or non-fortune of falling off a cliff. Nick Mooney, his name is, and Nick was working on the peregrine falcon back in the 80s, and so he was one of my colleagues, and he managed to step off a cliff and do some serious damage to himself, broken ribs and very bruised, and I'd been assisting him for quite a few weeks, so I'd learnt the ropes, literally and proverbially, so a lot of rope work, and so for the next couple of months I took over the project. So this was doing banding and looking at reproductive success of the peregrine falcon. So that got to me to some spectacular places, and as you know, peregrine falcons are one of the most spectacular birds in the world. So I've got a strong liking for the peregrine falcon.
Now, I always ask bird people, bird nerds, are they a ticker and a flicker, or are they just an immersive experienced bird watcher? Where do you sit on that spectrum, Mark?
Uh, Most definitely, I'm in for the experience wherever it takes me. I can't recall when I added up my bird list. Might have been 10 years ago. I'm not certainly not a ticker. Um, I love birds because no matter where you go in the world, there'll be something to see. Even at airports, at sewage farms, in urban areas, you'll find a bird, and that's birds take me to interesting places and interesting experiences. So I'm definitely a experiential birder.
Uh, is there, you're not maintaining a list, but do you have like a bird bucket list? Is there something that you really want to see that has eluded you, or is there a trip you're planning to go and see that one special thing?
Yeah, I would like to see. So there's in Australasia uh, there are what are we? I'm trying to count them up. There are four ground parrots, or parrots that are live on the ground or nocturnal, and that's the eastern ground parrot, the night parrot, the western ground parrot, and the kakapo. All very similar in coloration, but all quite different in their habits and habitats. So I've seen three of those four, and I want to get the fourth one.
And is that the
And
Western
that's
ground
happens
parrot?
to be it's the western ground
Yeah.
parrot.
Well, I'm going to say
So
that.
I was lucky enough to. So eastern ground parrot, that's easy. That's near orange belly parrots in Melaleuca. See them all the time. But I've been lucky enough to see the kakapo back in 1995. So we're working on on threatened species over there many moons ago, and was lucky enough to connect with the kakapo. And I have been involved in the night parrot program, both in Queensland, in the Diamantina, and in Western Australia, with some of the captures and recoveries of birds there with some of the researchers. So I've ticked all the two of the hardest ones off, as it were. But the Western ground parrot is proving to be my bogey bird.
The bogey bird. Well, Mark, if you get to see it, you're going to be one of the very, very, very few people who have been able to see one in recent times.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I was listening to Tegan's talk, and it's certainly one that's desperately close to extinction. That's been hammered by feral predators and fires, and they've got a long way to go to get that one over the edge. So hopefully I'll be able to see it. I have seen it in captivity, but I'm not going to count that one. I want to see it in its habitat and again experience where it lives and how it lives, and the environment it's in is more important to me than the actual tick. But I'll take that one if it comes along.
Yeah. Now, Mark, you kind of alluded to what's in store for you in sort of the next step along the line. But let's say, I usually say 5 years from now, but I reckon in 5 years you're still going to be running dogs around the world and chasing down rats and mice without a doubt. So let's put the horizon a bit further out. Where do you see yourself? What do you see yourself doing in, say, 10 to 15 years?
Well, we've got it. We wouldn't mind spending a bit more time on Christmas Island. Too often we only go there for a week or two, and it's never long enough. So a semi-retirement in the tropics of Christmas Island, particularly during Tassie winters, is quite appealing. And the beauty of it is Christmas Island has got heaps of birds all over it, even in the urban areas. So that would be a place there I could quite happily retire to. And by the way, that's one of the programs that may come up soon, is the eradication of cats off that island. So in the very near future, I'm hopeful that it'll be cat-free, which again will be a real bonus for that island.
Oh well, I could make a political joke there and say maybe you could get a rat eradication program going, and a certain minister might fly in just for that, and you could do us a favour.
There's a lot of those around.
I don't think that'll make the final cut, Mark.
No. Leave that well alone.
That I might put that in the bloopers thing for episode 100, maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, I think I'll just have to do our sort of wrap up now, Mark. So, well, Mark, thank you so much for having a chat. I've learned a lot, and it's really great to speak to somebody who is legendary is the wrong word, but there's a name that you're always seeing in print, and as I said right at the beginning, I've always been watching you popping up on Twitter, and I've got to say, you're not how I imagined you would be when we're having a chat. I thought you might be a bit...
I'll take that as a compliment.
I thought you might be a bit scarier. So, well, Mark,
The legend precedes me.
that's right. You, Mark Holdsworth, the legend. Oh no! Thanks so much for agreeing to take part in the bird emergency. Of course, the whole reason of doing the bird emergency is not only to talk about the birds that desperately need our help and the programs and all the big efforts that people are making to try and ensure that they all do hang on, but also to meet some of the people and get to know them and appreciate the long time it takes to make an impact in conservation. So thank you again, Mark Holdsworth, and I hope you enjoy your semi-retirement on Christmas Island, chasing down cats, mice, rats, and anything else that we don't want.
That's a pleasure.